It's the final weekend of the regular season. We are just over a week away from Selection Sunday, and that means it's time on a Friday night to do another episode of Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. Great to see all of you here as we get set for what's going to be a jam-packed weekend, both for seating purposes, for the bubble, and for everything else. We have what you need covered right here on the Field of 68. I'm Paul Fritschner. That's Lukas Harkins. That's Rocco Miller. And I guess we'll start as we always do. Where in the world is Rocco Miller? What do you have on tap for us, Rocco? What do you got going on this weekend?
It's probably my most lamest week in terms of entertaining you, Paul.
Oh,
I'm
no.
I'm bunkered up. I know I'm bunkered up. We're doing a few of us in the bracketology community are doing a mock committee exercise all weekend on Zoom, and I'm staying put. Going to take in the action, and then first thing Monday I'll be on my way to Vegas. So if you're out there, say hello. I'll be there at least for a few days doing the WCC semis and finals, and then probably trickling over maybe a little bit of WAC action. They've got a nice little quarterfinal Thursday, but we'll see how it plays out. There's going to be so much great basketball next week. I feel like Vegas is a good place to be.
Lukas, it was great to see you on Wednesday night up at Hinkle Fieldhouse. How's everything going on your end?
Yeah, doing well. My trips aren't as fun, although I'll get the Horizon on Monday, Tuesday, just down the road from me here in Indy. So that's a really going to be a really fun semis and championship there. Really hotly contested league this year at the top.
Yeah, Robert Morris, a lot of talent on that team. Oakland, yeah, pulling off the upset last night. How about that? Speaking of winners,
Penguins and Vikes.
The Penguins, yeah. Speaking of winners, let's start the week. Or let's start the show from the winners of the week. And Rocco, we'll go to you first here. Biggest winners of the week for you.
Yeah, I'll take the alley-oop from you any day, Paul, and slam dunk for the Florida Gators. I think it speaks for themselves. They have the win at Alabama now in hand as of Wednesday night. The two biggest games on their schedule, they won them both at Auburn, at Alabama. It sets their resume apart. Just from a sheer individual win standpoint. They're also sitting there with only 4 losses. And it's a very nice resume, very nice, clean one-seed resume. It helps separate them from Alabama as well. It also delivered Alabama their 7th loss of the year. So they have, although Alabama's done a ton in winning, they've taken on those 7 losses. It's 3 more losses than Florida has now. And they obviously woke up feeling very good about their chances to get a 1 seed. They have to finish. We'll talk about that more. They finished with Ole Miss, but I think if they get that win at home in the Swamp on Senior Day, they should be sitting pretty on Selection Sunday. And then for BYU, to me, they keep doing the unthinkable. At first, it was like, oh, BYU can't go to McHale and win. Well, they did. Then it was like, there's no way BYU can go to Hilton Magic and win. Well, guess what, folks? The Cougars did it again. And now they've gone from a team not even in the field or barely even discussed because they really hadn't beat anybody, by late January, to being not only in the field, but now they have some really amazing wins to go with it, especially away from home. So congrats to the Cougars. They just keep going. They just keep climbing faster than probably anybody. And then I would also say Texas A&M, kind of obvious, but they had that losing streak going. No better way to stop the bleeding than doing it against the number 1 team in the country. Texas A&M takes pride in bringing a football game to the basketball court. And I don't blame Auburn for really not wanting a big part of that. Plus, Auburn got dinged up themselves. We saw Broome get nicked up in that game, and Denver Jones was questionable that night. So, yeah, like good win. Either way, it doesn't matter at the end of the day in bracketology. Texas A&M has a win over Auburn now, and now they're back in that hunt for trying to work their way back to the top of the 3 and maybe into the 2s.
Yeah, what BYU has done lately, if you look at where BYU was on January 18th after that loss to Utah in overtime, and they're sitting there at 11-6, they're 2-4 in the Big 12, and you're thinking, all right, this is a bubble team at best. Are they going to be able to put some wins together here? And now all of a sudden, BYU hasn't lost since February 8th. Kansas, Arizona, Iowa State wins all mixed in there. They have not only gotten themselves off the bubble, and I know we'll talk more about BYU here coming up in the show, but just while we're mentioning it, BYU has quickly gotten up there. 6 seed, 5 seed, that they're racing up the leaderboard.
They're doing
Can
their
they
best.
Get that high?
I don't know if they're quite. They're not quite there yet. They still have losing quad one record at 5-7, but they've got a winning record on the road now, which they never had before. I think you can give BYU a hard time for a 309 non-conference strength of schedule, but I would also caution against that because non-conference strength of schedule is taken into account in both the strength of resume and the wins above bubble and the net itself. So you definitely don't want to double count having a poor schedule out of conference. So those are the things working against them. But the things they have are road wins at Iowa State, at Arizona, at West Virginia. That trio of road wins in this part of the bracket really stands out.
Lukas, your biggest winners from this week?
Yeah, I'll fly us down towards the bubble. SEC bubble teams had a really nice week. Arkansas wins at Vandy. Texas wins at Mississippi State to kind of rise from the dead a little bit for Texas to kind of put themselves. They're still on the wrong side of the cut line for me, but bring themselves back into real consideration point coming into this final stretch. Oklahoma wins at home against Missouri. All three of those kind of are really important wins at this time of year to kind of stay in the mix, or for Arkansas and Oklahoma, at least in my opinion, stay just barely on the right side of the cut line. I'm sure we'll talk about it with biggest losers as well. But Ohio State, Nebraska, one of those teams was going to be a big winner. One of those was going to be a big loser. It turns out the Buckeyes get the win. And obviously you and I hung out at Xavier Butler this week, and Xavier kind of stays in that mix in that last four in, first four out conversation, winning on the road at Butler.
Yeah, and I guess we can flip it right to you there, Lukas, the biggest losers of the week for you.
Yeah, Nebraska really takes a hit. I mean, I'm having a hard time keeping them really that close to the field at this point right now. They're now sub 50 across resume metrics and quality metrics. They're 5-10 in quadrant one. It's a lot of wins, but they've had a lot of opportunities to get there. 2 quadrant 3 losses. I think that Nebraska's fallen to the wrong side of the cut line for me. And by a little bit of a margin right now. San Diego State took that loss at UNLV. That's one that brings them more towards a definite double-digit seed projection, and are certainly not as safe as they had been and are a clear tier behind New Mexico and Utah State, in my opinion, out of the Mountain West right now. I think they're definitely the number 3, maybe even 4 team, depending on what happens tonight between Boise State and Colorado State. So I think that San Diego State's put themselves in a little bit more precarious position than I think most would have thought a couple weeks ago.
Rocco, your losers of the week this week.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree Nebraska is my first team on the list. I'll also say Tennessee just because they had that big win over the last weekend against Alabama, of course, the dramatic, near half-court game winner. But they turn around and they lose a tough one at Ole Miss. Very good game, lost by 2 points. But that's how tight the battle is for the 1 seed. Any kind of loss, as we mentioned before with Alabama, is going to start to separate, especially a loss against a team, not near the 1 line. Ole Miss was down in the 5-7 range before tip-off. And so that's just enough to make it clear that Tennessee belongs as one of the better 2 seeds. It's just a kind of a missed opportunity in some ways. Now, they might have complicated things if they won because, again, Florida belongs and Houston certainly has a dapper resume themselves. But Tennessee losing to Ole Miss really cleared up the picture. So just a missed opportunity there for the Vols, despite a great season. And even more so from a basketball standpoint, I would call out Michigan a little bit. Starting to get a little concerned about the Wolverines. Now, I love the way they've been able to close out a lot of close games. I think Dusty's an incredible coach, game planner. I think they have an incredible staff. I know all those guys, but their guard play lately has been a little bit subpar. I thought the Maryland guards, even though the game was in Ann Arbor, really dominated. That game could have been a lot worse than the final score showed. And Michigan's just got a lot to fix in general as a potential team that wants to advance in the tournament. Obviously, they're going to be in, no problem. But this latest stretch, getting blown out over the weekend and then coming back and losing at home to Maryland is really kind of killing their chances for a protected seed. And I think above all else, they just need to find themselves again and get confident.
Well, for the matchup issues that Michigan can create to then have so many turnovers, that's what leaves you vulnerable to an upset when you get into the first weekend of the tournament, where you're looking at a Michigan team that maybe, plays a mid-major that can turn you over, and then all of a sudden you're losing out on possessions. If you don't start hitting shots, those kinds of things that can go wrong, that's where you leave yourself susceptible to something going really wrong in 2 weeks from now. But all right, you guys both mentioned Florida, and the week that Florida had and what they were able to do. They go on the road to Coleman Coliseum. They get a win on Alabama's senior night, a win that has now elevated them up to the 1 seed line. Is this what you feel like, is appropriate for this team and where they'll stick over the next 2 weeks?
I don't know about whether they'll stick or not. I think they've certainly earned to be the 1 seed right now. And I think they're the favorite to earn that final 1 seed as we go into the last week here. But I'm certainly not ready to rule out Alabama or Tennessee. I think the top 6 is the same top 6 it's been, and just kind of switched over the order this week. With Florida getting to that last spot, and I think they obviously have that leg up over Bama and Tennessee right now. But should Florida, drop back-to-back games, they could lose their regular season finale at home to Ole Miss. They drop a game in the SEC tournament early. Things can change where Alabama or Tennessee could still get up there. But for right now, Florida, I think, definitely has that leg up for the last spot.
Rocco, how about you on Florida?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they got to. I was trying to say that with Tennessee as well, kind of what Lukas was saying, that margins are so thin still. You can't go back and erase that win with a loss at home to Ole Miss. So they got to close strong in Gainesville. Like I said, senior day, Saturday. And I think, one of the things really going well for Florida right now is, and again, this won't show up on the team sheets, but I'm sure it will be presented in the room with the actual committee, is the fact that they're number 2 in the SEC. They'll be the 2 seed in the tournament. And I think that speaks volumes just in terms of, and again, you could pick that apart a little bit because there are imbalanced schedules within the league. Like I know Tennessee had one of the stronger ones. Florida had maybe one of the weaker ones. But in general, it's a lot of games. It's enough data. They finished second place by themselves. And they'll play Thursday evening. So with the way that the committee starts their process and votes, I think if Florida can just win that first one Thursday evening, make it to Friday, I can't really see them not being a 1 at this point. The other point I'd like to make is, and again, it's splitting hairs a little bit, but it does have a big deal to do with travel once you get to March Madness, is, I would slightly give the nod to Florida above Houston at this point for the 3rd overall number 1 seed. And that's basically because they both have 9 wins against the field, but obviously Florida's road wins are better than anybody's. Auburn and Alabama. Houston, that is no slouch. They have Arizona and Texas Tech up there. But then when you factor in the non-conference where Houston's best win is Notre Dame and Florida's isn't much better, but they do have some better wins than Notre Dame. And everything else, they have each have 4 losses. Florida actually has 1 more quad 1A win. And resume-wise, they're pretty even. So I think just with the sheer statement that they made by winning 2 games in the state of Alabama against those 2 powerhouses, I think that's enough for them to get the Indianapolis spot as the number 1 in the Midwest, and I think that sends Houston to the West.
Okay, so Alabama and Tennessee, we've talked about them already a little bit, but just how close are both of those teams to potentially being able to flip-flop for those spots, just to tie a bow on this whole segment here?
I think it's extremely close. They both have 12 wins against the field. Now, again, Alabama finishes at Auburn. So that's the cliffhanger here. If Alabama wins that game, we have to go back and look at them again as a potential 1 seed. I've kind of played that scenario out already. It seems like they'll fall just short, but there is an argument to put them above Houston for sure, especially since they beat Houston on a neutral. Right now, between just Alabama and Tennessee for the best number 2 seed, Alabama, in my view, has that one. They both won at Texas A&M, but Alabama's next best win at Kentucky is a little stronger than Tennessee's next best road win. And again, I'm only looking at road wins because that's what moves the needle. Tennessee's next best road wins Illinois and Louisville, whereas Alabama has Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. Plus, they throw in that Houston win, and they got their own Illinois win as well. So I think when you break it all down, go tit for tat, you end up with the Tide.
Lukas, any thoughts there on those two, Tennessee and Alabama, as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I don't think Tennessee controls its own destiny to get to a 1 seed. I think Alabama potentially does. I think Florida certainly has the edge right now, but a road win at Auburn obviously changes things in a way that Tennessee can't do. Also, if Alabama were to win at Auburn, they would lead the country by themselves. They'd be the sole leader in Quadrant 1A wins this season. That'd be their 10th. Auburn has 9. No one else has more than, I think, 6 in the country. So Alabama really can still push themselves over a Florida or a Houston at this point in the season. I think Duke and Auburn are in pretty good shape, in reverse order. Auburn, then Duke, are in pretty good shape to be the 1 and 2 spots. But I think in order, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, of those 3 SEC squads.
Okay, so the one team we haven't, I don't even think, said at all yet is Michigan State. They're just kind of lingering around right now. They won the Big Ten outright the other night with a win at Iowa. They're 9th on KenPom right now, 25-5 on the season. Their defense obviously has been phenomenal this year. What are we thinking about the Spartans, fellas? Is there any outside chance that they could sneak on up there in the back door?
I said it on Monday. I think they are as locked into like the number 7 spot in my curve as you could be. They're definitely a tier behind the top 6 for me. They're a tier behind that Alabama, Florida, Tennessee group. And whoever you put as your last 2 seed, whether that's a Texas Tech, Wisconsin, St. John's, even a Texas A&M, whoever you put there, Michigan State I have ahead of them too by a pretty sizable margin. I have a hard time seeing off the 2, and I have a hard time seeing them climb into the 1. I feel like they are, up there with Auburn and Duke as 1 seeds. Michigan State is one of the teams I feel most comfortable staying where I have them seated right now in a week.
Same feeling for you, Rocco?
I certainly agree. And to add in some additional context, right above Michigan State are the Alabama-Tennessee combo we just spoke of, who both have road wins at Texas A&M. And, of course, Alabama has a road win at Kentucky and Mississippi State. Right now, Michigan State's best road wins are Michigan and Maryland, which are good for the Big Ten. But Texas A&M is much higher on the board than either of those teams at this stage. They're fighting for a 3 or even a 2. And the depth of the wins that Alabama and Tennessee have is something Michigan State can't match. They simply can't. They got 6 quad 1A wins, which is even with Tennessee, but Tennessee's got 12 wins against the field, and Michigan State's got 7. So it's just some of it's obviously the SEC teams get way more opportunities, but they've also been that pair of Alabama Tennessee to start with. They've been remarkably consistent, and I just think that creates a barrier that Lukas is mentioning that Michigan State is having a difficult time to overcome. They also don't have a loss outside of Q1, those 2, and Michigan State already does. So that's a major problem for the Spartans to be able to achieve that. Tennessee does end the year with a South Carolina home game. So maybe if Tennessee loses that game, that gives them a window to pass them. But that's about it.
All right, we have a lot to get to with the bubble, but before we do that, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're doing everything from last 4 in, first 4 out, who's still sitting right around there on the bubble. All of that and more when we get back. Plenty to get to on the Field of 68. This is the Fielding the 68 show presented by Rhythm.
College basketball fans, are you ready to take your hoops game to a new level? Whether you're a seasoned bettor or just trying to win your March Madness office pool, Rhythm is here to give you the edge this season. With data-driven predictions for every single college basketball game left on the schedule, Rhythm helps you maximize your bets. And as March Madness kicks off, Rhythm's insights will help you spot those plucky Cinderellas that you know are going to shake up the NCAA tournament. But that's not all. When Selection Sunday rolls around, let Rhythm's AI-powered bracket generator do the heavy lifting for you. This is the same AI tool that performed 35% better than the average ESPN bracket last year. And here's the best part. Rhythm pairs perfectly with our Field of 68 expert analysis, giving you the 1-2 punch that you need for the rest of the college basketball season. So don't wait. Download Rhythm today and get ready to see college basketball and your betting results in a whole new light. If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today. Now is your chance to prove you're smarter than the field of 68. We're hosting a Survivor contest with our partner Splash Sports. There's a $25 entry fee, a 25 entry max in the contest, and more than 1,700 spots available, which means there's a $40,000 max prize for the winner. Survivor is the future of March Madness. Each day you pick a team to win. If they win, you advance. We'll also be running a free to enter bracket contest as well as a second chance Survivor in the Sweet 16. So prove you know more ball than the field of 68 on Splash Sports.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. Access expert-backed predictions for every remaining college basketball game, from rivalries to sleeper matchups. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. Friday night here doing Fielding the 68. Great to be with all of you watching, listening, wherever you are in the world, paying attention to bracketology. About 10 days away from seeing a bracket, and this is a opportunity for us to talk about those teams that are right there on the cut line. Paul Fritschner, Lukas Harkins, Rocco Miller with you. And we're going to start here in this bubble segment with the last four in. And Lukas, we'll start with yours. Your last four teams in the field as of right now.
Yeah, coming into the weekend, I've gone with Indiana, Boise State, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Indiana still hangs on after the road loss at Oregon earlier this week. They still don't have a loss outside of Quadrant 1 this season. They're just 4-12 in those games, but they don't have any losses outside there. They're clean 14-0 against Quadrants 2, 3, and 4. Resume metrics up there to 42 right now, which puts them on par with a lot of teams right around the cut line, as Arkansas is 43 and Oklahoma's 43 as well. Both those teams right in the mix. Oklahoma still hanging around because of its really great non-conference, and then it decides to back that up every once in a while with a really big value win in the SEC. Earlier, that was the home win over Mississippi State. This week, it's the home win over Missouri. They still have a road win over Arkansas in the mix during league play as well. That keeps them in this strong conversation. Arkansas picked up the road win over Vanderbilt to keep itself on the right side of the cut line right now. Boise State's got the big one tonight. They get Colorado State at home. That's really the significant matchup of the night on the bubble. Both those teams really in the conversation. Colorado State has work to do. Boise State might have work to do too. I think I have them on the right side right now because when you look at their non-conference performances, they have the home win over Clemson. They have a neutral site win over St. Mary's, two teams that I have on my number 5 seed line right now. Those are really good wins for Boise State, and I think it's important that they come out of conference. We saw the committee wasn't super high on the Mountain West as a conference last season at the selection show. They were underseeded compared to what many thought they were going to be at. And I think if that's going to be the case again this year, you're going to have to, if you're a Mountain West team, you're going to have to have picked up quality outside of conference play. And I think Boise State did that. Obviously, then they've added in conference play. They've added wins over New Mexico and Utah State at home, which gives them 4 total wins over the field. I still have them on the right side of the cut line right now. Could they be on the wrong side by the end of the night? Absolutely. But for now, I still have them on the right side.
So Indiana plays at Ohio State, or I believe that's in Bloomington, right, on Sunday.
Ohio State.
Yep, it's in Bloomington. So Indiana and Ohio State meeting a couple of teams that aren't feeling extremely confident. Yeah, right, exactly. So comparing that game, if you're another bubble team where two teams are back to back like that, let's just say any of these other teams, who do you root for in a game like that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because I think, generally speaking, I think if we're gonna follow and Rocco's rule of quadrant 1 through 3 record, in that case, you're going to want to root for Indiana because in that loss, Ohio State would fall to 11-13, 11-14 against the upper 3 quadrants. They'd be 3 games under 500 in those meaningful games. I think that'd be a pretty big hit. Also, Indiana already has better resume metrics right now. I think Indiana I have Ohio State rated higher in my field because they have better quality metrics. And once they were selected for my field, they received a higher spot on the board. But in terms of who would actually make the field, I feel more confident in Indiana than Ohio State right now. I think they have a more forgivable resume than the Buckeyes do at this point. So I think if Indiana were to just take that one at home, I think I'd feel better about that if we were a bubble team than Ohio State picking up a road win.
Rocco, any thoughts on all of that before we get to yours?
Yeah, I mean, Lukas figured it out. I think I agree with that. I think it's a loser-out game in a lot of ways. I mean, Indiana could still get back into it, but here's the situation. The winner of that game is going to be the 9 seed and get a bye. All right, so that's already big enough stakes because the loser is going to have to play an extra day. Now, if Ohio State loses the game, that gives them an extra day to pick up some wins, but we just don't know how many. I mean, I think they would have to try to get 3 wins to make up for that loss because, as Lukas said, right now, if you take quad 4 out of the equation and they lose tomorrow, they'll be 11-14. You'd have to win 3 to get to 14-14, and then you lose your last one and go 14-15 for that final record. I think that might get it done for the Buckeyes, but it's, again, trying to project when the committee's done with their voting and some of those things can get very tricky. So obviously the best recipe for the Buckeyes is to win tomorrow, play their way back into a reasonable record, and then, of course, get a better seed due to those nice wins at Purdue over Kentucky and a home win over Maryland. And then from Indiana's point of view, I would say, they lose that game, let's pretend they lose, then they've got to go play an extra game against the number 15 seed. They'd be in the 10-15 game most likely, and I think that won't move the needle for them. Right now, they're already fine in terms of their record, but they need quad 1 games, and they're 4-12 in quad 1. They're 2-9 against the 11 tournament level teams they've played. There's already enough reasons to leave the Hoosiers out. So the only way they can reinforce to the committee that they belong is playing tournament level competition. So the best recipe for Indiana is to not only win that game, but then get a crack at either Illinois or Oregon, who are the only 2 teams that could play in that 8-9 game. And that would be a huge upside opportunity for the Hoosiers in the Big Ten tournament with really limited downside. That's why it's really critical for both teams.
Rocco, your last 4 in.
Well, we'll start with the Hoosiers. We got the Hoosiers there. We've got the Hoosiers there, and I honestly, I would call all 4 of these teams repeal teams. And what I mean by repeal teams are, as championship week develops, we just watched Drake play this morning. We'll have a lot more games going on every single day from now until Selection Sunday. And as soon as those first few bids get stolen, we're going to have to start doing what I call repealing teams from the field. And I think all 4 of these teams are very much in that bucket because they'll be the first to go, which makes sense, right? They're the last 4 going to Dayton. But for very different reasons. I think with Indiana, the other factor is to find Indiana's 5th win on their resume right now, you have to go all the way down to quad 2B. They have nothing in 2A. They have 4 in the quad 1, but they're batting .250 in quad 1, which is 4 out of 16 tries. So it's rough for Indiana. They've got the huge win at Michigan State. Obviously, we love that. And they've got the Ohio State road win already, and they supplement with some road wins at Penn State and Washington, which aren't nothing. They're quad 2, but obviously 2B at this point. And it's important to delineate that. I think a lot of the public doesn't understand that quad 2 is split in half, and that's critical for the bubble. The other thing I think the public needs to understand is that the actual selection committee has subcommittees, and one of the subcommittees is just the bubble. So anything about these teams is going to be completely unearthed, like over and over and over and over again. I'm not joking. And so they're going to know when we get to Boise State that they played St. Mary's in Idaho Falls, a de facto Boise State home game. They're going to know all those types of things. So if you're on the bubble, just be prepared to be completely examined like you're at the doctor's office. So Xavier, you're next. Congrats, Paul, for today. But the thing you like about Xavier, you're going under the hood, like it or not, Paul. The thing about Xavier that you like is that they're at they got the win at Marquette, of course. That win is not aging very well. Marquette's continuing to struggle, but it still matters. It's a big road win. I think Xavier is going to get another crack at Marquette. I think, Paul, you would agree with that. In the 4 versus 5 game, seems to be shaping up that way. And we might be in a situation where they just got to get that second win against Marquette. If they can do that, feel pretty good. We'll revisit that next week. But, of course, they have the wins over UConn and Creighton. That really helped. That makes their 1-9 quad 1 a little bit more digestible than like a North Carolina's 1-10, where they only have 1 win against the field. Xavier has 3 wins against the field. I keep getting that question, so I'm just going to reiterate that. And beyond that, they're starting to shore up some of those loose ends. They got the road win at Butler. That helps because their road record wasn't good. It's still not great. 6-8 overall away from Cintas, 3-7 against the top 2 quads in true road opportunities. Next, we have Oklahoma. I won't waste too much time there because I think for Oklahoma, decision day is tomorrow. They enter the day 1-7 in true road games. there's never been an at-large team ever selected with less than 2. So they have a million other reasons why it's important. We know about the conference record, all these other things that are going to get all the headlines. But I'm telling you, that's the most important thing. If they lose that game at Texas, they're going to close up the book for the regular season with a 1-8 true road record. Good luck getting in, Sooners. So got to get that win. Otherwise, they've done enough. They've won enough to be included for right now. But again, and obviously, if they lose that game, they're 5-13 in league. That certainly is going to be somewhat discussed. Certainly will be known in the committee room. Last but not least, Boise State, I hinted at it, a lot of their damage. And again, I think they've done enough to get in for right now. It's very close. Happened in the state of Idaho. Clemson, New Mexico, Utah State, St. Mary's, all big-time wins, all in the state of Idaho. Everything outside of the state of Idaho wasn't as pretty. They did win twice in the state of Nevada, but those teams are not going to the dance. And we know how the committee typically treats the Mountain West, so I have zero faith that they'll be kind to the Boise State Broncos if they can't shore this up. Lukas said big game tonight, but again, it's in Idaho. Just got to keep winning.
So I have a question for you, and this comes from Xavier's resume, but it can apply to anybody. I saw a Xavier fan yesterday tweeted at David Warlock, who, if you don't know who David Warlock is, he's the media coordinator for March Madness. And the question was about outliers on a resume. And when you look at Xavier's KPI, it's really what's dragging Xavier down. And you could maybe split hairs for other metrics and for other teams, whatever, but it's almost 20 spots lower than the other resume metrics that they have. Is that something that's sitting in the committee room they're aware of, that everything else is high to mid 40s, but you have the one that's maybe 15 or 18 spots off? Or does that not matter?
Yeah, we don't know the actual truth. We just know that it's printed on the sheet, and they can interpret it how they see fit. And that could be different. There's 12 committee members plus the subcommittees, right? So that could be interpreted a lot of different ways. The way I look at it is, and the way it's kind of lined up the last few years at least, is the strength of resume, aka the SOR, has been the most consistent. Now we have the wins above bubble. Those two seem to be pretty similar. A lot of the teams are getting ranked, within 5 spots of each other in that. And I don't know, like, the KPI certainly has got some flaws. I see all the social media posts about it, but I think common sense should rule the day, which is the old school NCAA tournament motto of every chairman ever, which is, who did you play? How did you do? And, who did you play? How did you do? And where was it played at? And, that's where Xavier is winning out. And I think those should be the principles to get the right 68 teams.
Yeah, and just to finish that up, to your point, though, from what you said earlier, if UConn beats Seton Hall tomorrow, it will be Xavier and Marquette at 2:30 next week at Madison Square Garden in the quarterfinals, because Xavier already has a bye into the quarterfinal round. So that's, a win tomorrow would be 7 in a row to close the regular season. Then a win over Marquette would be 8 in a row, plus another quad 1 win. You have to feel like 22 wins plus 14 Big East wins. I know there could be bid stealers, but you have to feel at least pretty good, right?
Yeah, and I think let me give you the horrible side of that. And I know you don't want to hear it, but you got to accept it. If you lose that Marquette game in the quarterfinals, you're 1-10 in quad 1. You don't want that.
Yep. All right. Let's go now to Rocco. We're going to keep you on here. The light's coming back on. Your first 4 out.
Yeah, so the first 4 out, North Carolina, obviously playing better as a whole. Sadly for them, they're in the ACC. And we just don't know how good or bad these teams are that they're pounding. Just blew out Virginia Tech the other day. Kind of same old thing we've been saying. They probably need the Duke win. If they get the Duke win, I think we'll all feel pretty good about putting them in. Obviously, their performance numbers and even their resume stuff's getting better, but only one win against the field is really the most important thing. It's UCLA, and they have a win out. And they have a loss outside of the field, home Stanford. So they're basically one horrible loss, one really good win, and then a ton of losing in between in all their important games. And then otherwise flawless in the middle. So it's tricky. You can take the heels if you absolutely need them. But I think the 4 that I had earlier as my last 4 in are more deserving thus far based on how they've performed against tournament level competition. My next team is UC Irvine. I think the Anteaters continue to get more and more interesting. They've won 16 games away from Irvine. I believe UC San Diego is above the bubble, so that gives them a win above the bubble in terms of a sample size against the tournament field. And that was obviously in La Jolla. In their top 2 quad record, again, they're 4-3, so they have a winning record where they need to have one. And they're 15-5 in those meaningful games. Of course, they took a couple losses in the league. But, I mean, I'm telling you, 16 wins away from Irvine is absolutely special. They've been living out of hotels almost the entire non-conference season, and I was with them in Canada. They're phenomenal. Great team. Need to be recognized, need to be discussed by the committee. Next is Ohio State. We kind of talked about their fate. You know, I could list Ohio State as the first out if you wanted. If they beat Indiana tomorrow, they'll be in on Monday. So the Buckeyes are right there. And then Nebraska. Lukas did a great job summarizing the Cornhuskers. The thing that keeps Nebraska very interesting is their road wins at Oregon and at Creighton, and they back that up with wins over Illinois, UCLA, and Indiana. The bad is the home losses to Rutgers, USC, and Minnesota. A lot of losing in Lincoln this year on top of those good wins. It's been a bipolar type of year for the Cornhuskers. But I think they finished with Iowa at home, and if they get that win, you could plug them back in on Monday. If they lose the game, check this out, Paul. If they lose the game, they might not even make the Big Ten tournament.
That's crazy. I mean, at some point, it's like, what are we doing here? They're fighting to make their own conference tournament.
And that's why I'm saying you got to talk to UC Irvine.
Yes. Lukas, your first 4 out.
Yeah, my first 4 out right now are Xavier, North Carolina, Texas, and Colorado State. I think we've hit on a lot on Xavier so far. I don't have a problem with them being selected right now. I did give these other teams an edge because they have more wins over the field right now versus Xavier, who's just 1-9 in Quadrant 1. And I think that really is the sticking point where they're going to need to be better than that to get into the field, especially when their resume metrics still lag behind. Right now, they have the second worst resume metrics of a team that's truly in my first, either in my field or in my first few teams out. Only Boise State has worse, and Boise State has 4 wins over the field compared to Xavier's 3. That's my difference right there. Otherwise, they're 48.3 in resume metrics across the board, which is relatively low. And as we spoke already about the KPI bringing that down a bit, that still is evident on the team sheet is that 59 that will drag them down. North Carolina, Rocco hit plenty on. I think we're all in agreement there where they're probably just going to need to win that Duke game. And if they don't, they're going to need a lot of help in the ACC tournament, of which there's not a whole lot of help offered in the ACC tournament. Texas gets itself back into the mix. With its win at Mississippi, they're going to have to win at home against Oklahoma this weekend. I think that's the bubble game of the weekend is Texas, Oklahoma. And the bubble game of the weeknight then is going to be Boise State, Colorado State tonight. I think Colorado State is probably a touch below first 4 out, but I have them here because I think they have the best path of these teams in this area to potentially get there. They would be behind, like right now, I think they'd be behind some of these teams like a San Francisco or a UC Irvine, but I think their path is stronger to potentially get into the field. With UC Irvine, I don't really see a path if they lose another game, which they're going to have to do to be an at-large candidate. They'd have to lose again. Only one team's made the tournament with quality metrics. DPI, KenPom, T-Rank as bad as UC Irvine has right now, which is 80th across the board. And that team was 2022. It was 2022 Wyoming. They had 11 wins against the upper 2 quadrants. UC Irvine's going to peak at 5 at best. I think that they're a team that, as much as I'd like to see them in the tournament, I think their best bet is winning the Big West tournament and getting 2 teams in, with UC San Diego potentially staying above the cut line in that case.
Okay, let's go through all 3 consensus here. We're going to do the last 4 in first on a consensus from the group. And we'll see here it is Arkansas, Oklahoma, Boise State, and Ohio State. We've talked about all of those teams so far, so we won't rehash that here. But now let's kick it to the consensus first 4 out. And you see Xavier, North Carolina, Nebraska, and Wake Forest. Somebody we haven't talked about here really too much on this show yet, on today's show at least. Thoughts on this one, fellas? Lukas, back to you first.
Yeah, Wake's my 5th team out. I'm saying ooh because that means Brad has them either our averages are twisted or Brad has them higher than Rocco and I do, and his first 4 out are in the field. They're another example of KPI. They're 57th in KPI. They're 42nd in strength of record, 47 in WAB. Very similar to Xavier in resume metrics points. They're 14-10 against the upper two quadrants. That's a really good plus. But I think that, being 2-7 in quadrant 1, 0-6 in quadrant 1A, sub 70 quality metrics puts them in a difficult spot. But they're a selectable team as in terms of having, a good record against meaningful games. And pretty solid resume metrics that are on par with the rest of the bubble. If they were to finish strong, I think that their path is less so than my teams that are in the first 4 out right now, because the ACC just doesn't afford that many opportunities, including in the ACC tournament. There isn't that much, especially considering a team, like all these teams, they're going to have to lose again. And you have to look at who are they going to lose to. And I think when you look at teams maybe in the SEC, that their losses are a little bit more forgivable than any non-Duke loss in the ACC, maybe non-Clemson, but the SEC teams are at the top, or better losses than losing to Clemson would even be. So I have Wake Forest a touch behind that group.
Rocco, any reaction there?
Yeah, pretty similar. I had Wake Forest. It was a hold your nose situation for me on Monday as the last team in. I guess it was maybe with the I didn't feel good about any team going in the last spot on Monday, so I threw Wake Forest in there on the off chance they might show up at Duke, and they got buried. So they're pretty clearly out now. But I think the interesting thing, the reason why they keep hanging around is, the fact that they beat Michigan and they got a few decent road wins headlined by SMU in the league. They have a winning road record, and some of that stuff's kind of keeping them afloat. But I think that third bad loss, they lost home Florida State, home Virginia, at NC State, kind of in the same stretch run of February. I think that third one probably was the blow that knocks them out for good, barring a revival at the ACC tournament, of course. And, I'm struggling to remember who they finished with, but I'm pulling that up real quick. They got Georgia Tech at home. That's not going to change anything. So, yeah, I think for Wake Forest, it's probably ACC tournament or bust. Despite us listing them, it's probably just a little bit too much to ask.
All right, and now let's check the consensus next 4 out. You see Texas in there, SMU. Colorado State has a big one tonight, and then UC Irvine. We've talked about UC Irvine already a little bit, but any more on this? SMU still kind of hanging around, maybe-ish?
Yeah, I think SMU has a path. I think SMU has a path because of how the ACC tournament lines up. If they were to get the 4 seed, they're probably going to get Wake Forest in the quarters, and then they'd get Duke in the semis. The odds of beating Wake Forest and then Duke, obviously, in the next game are low. But, as I was saying, the ACC doesn't afford a lot of opportunities. Duke is certainly one of those opportunities. Or SMU is not going to get in the tournament without a quad 1 win. And if they're going to add a quad 1 win, no better time to do it than over the number 2 overall seed. That would give them a shot. Their resume metrics are a touch behind bubble, but they're 54th on average. That still keeps them in range. Top 50 quality metrics. They have, a 17-4 record against quadrant 2 and 3. They've dominated against non-tournament teams. If they were to pick up that win over Duke, if they even get to such a game, I think there's a path there. But I think we all know that the odds of SMU, who hasn't beaten a quad 1 team this season, turning around and managing to do so against Duke is unlikely. But that is the path.
Rocco?
Agreed on SMU. I still, even if they did all that, I just don't know if the committee would still be hanging on for SMU or not. Yeah. So there's risk within that. But yeah, I mean, obviously you beat Duke, it changes your life if you're a bubble team. On the Texas ends of things, I'm probably further out on them than anybody. And the main reason is they have 4 losses outside of quad 1, which knocks their overall record. When you remove the 7 horrible teams they scheduled off of their record, they're now 10-13. And so I think they need 3 wins to get relevant. Obviously it starts tomorrow with Oklahoma, and then they need a couple wins in Nashville to make that 3 total. They're obviously going to finish with a loss if they're an at-large candidate. I get a little nervous with the SEC because obviously it's an unprecedented league, and we're all aware of everything being discussed, at the highest levels of media and within the circles of the potential room. But I just don't think there's a place for a team with that bad of a record. And the other thing about Texas as well, nice win at Mississippi State. That's easily their best road win. Before that, their only other significant road win was Oklahoma. They mixed in LSU and NC State. But to me, if you're a bubble team, especially with a bad record, I prefer more of like the Ohio State flavor of tea, Paul, because Ohio State went to Purdue. They went to Purdue and won. That's a protected seed level road win. Mississippi State has been all over the map. They've sunk between a 6 and an 8 seed or maybe worse. I don't know. But it's not the same as winning at Purdue. And so if you're going to take a chance on a team, I don't think Texas is that team.
All right. One more segment to go here on Fielding the 68, and it's going to be an interesting one because we're going to talk about some of these teams that are fighting for their life for an auto bid that maybe just might be in the field anyway, and then we'll finish up with some other teams that aren't closing the season as strong as they probably should and might be in more danger than they think they are at this point. All that and more coming up to round out the show. This is Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm.
As teams are fighting to get off the bubble and into the field of 68, I got a beverage for you that's been off the bubble since day one. Dad Water. No bubbles, no fizz, just a smooth, refreshing canned cocktail unlike anything else on the market today. If you're tired of the same old beers and seltzers on game day, crack open something different. Dad Water is made with tequila, water, and natural flavors. Nothing artificial, no BS. It's 100 calories, 0 sugar, 0 carbs, gluten-free, so if you're on a diet like me, you're good to go. Dad Water is also an Indiana brand. College Hoops is in its DNA, and they want you to enjoy a great lineup of products all tournament long. Dad Water is the ultimate game time drink with no bubbles. It just drinks like water. Clean, smooth, refreshing, and without those burps. So take it from me. This is the easiest drinking adult beverage I've ever had. Dad Water is now available at Target, Total Wine and Liquor, and Meijer, as well as your favorite local liquor stores. Or you can order online at drinkdadwater.com. Dad Water, tequila, water, natural flavors. Would you be surprised to find out that the Field of 68 is home to more than 35 podcasts? More than 25 team-specific podcasts that are hosted by the people that know what fans want the most. The Goodman and Humble podcast, the DTF podcast, the A10 Insider podcast, and the Mountain West podcast. But wait, there's even more. The Field of 68 will be launching the ACC Insider podcast this year. Subscribe to this channel and come along for the ride.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. Identify mid-majors and underdogs that could upset the field and shake up your bracket. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. All right, so we've talked about the bubble. We've talked about the top seeds. Now let's talk about some teams that are fighting to get in through an auto bid that maybe are safer than, some people might think they are. I think Drake, UC San Diego, and VCU are the three team spells that we need to talk about here in this segment. Drake today having no problem in their first game of Arch Madness out there in the MVC tournament. Lukas, when you look at Drake and you look at what they've done this year, if they were to get upset in the MVC, if they don't win the Missouri Valley, do you think that they are still pretty safely in regardless?
I don't know about safe. I'm probably lower on Drake than most are from a resume perspective, in part because their quality metrics are so far behind the other two of VCU and UC San Diego. 5-0 against the upper two quadrants is certainly a great start. They have the win over Vanderbilt. They have a win in a semi-road environment against Kansas State. I think there's enough to be on the right side of the cut line. I think they would be in the field. I think they would be maybe destined for Dayton because of those quality metrics, being what would be probably the lowest among any team selected should they get to that point. What gives me some hesitation with saying they'd definitely be safe is how much those resume metrics would drop depending on who they were to lose to. Right now, they're 38.7 on average across resume metrics. The bubble whether that's Arkansas, Oklahoma, those teams we've discussed. Xavier somewhere sits between 42 and 48 in those. So they have a leg up right now, but knowing they'd have to take a loss that would be worse than those teams would take, more than likely they'd fall into the mid 40s, I think, maybe low 40s. I think that gives me some hesitation with saying Drake would be safe. But worst case scenario, they're 5-1 against the upper two quadrants. I think that will keep them in the field, but I think there's a better chance of Dayton than there is of being like a 10 seed.
Okay. Rocco, Drake.
Yeah, well, Drake's a team that went undefeated in non-conference. I think that's extremely impressive. Obviously, Lukas listed their wins very, very well, the highlight wins. And I saw them at Kansas City that Kansas State hosted, so it does go down as a true road win. But the Vanderbilt one has been the big one because obviously Vanderbilt's cleanly in. They're coming from the biggest, baddest conference in one of the best ever in our time on earth here together, fellas. And Drake beat him by double digits in a championship game. I mean, the resume has to start and stop with that statement. And then from there, everything else they did is also nice to look at, and it's a very nice win percentage. They moved to 28-3 today, and there's some nice supplemental wins behind that win. So, for the way that historically under the radar teams have been judged by the committee, that's usually been the bar. Did you beat a team in the field, and did you do it away from home? And they check that box with flying colors. And where they get seeded and where they get sent, Lukas is probably right. They probably would have to go to Dayton if they fall short this weekend. But there certainly needs to be a home for the Bulldogs, in my opinion.
All right, we'll stick with you, Rocco, and UC San Diego.
Yeah, I feel nearly as strongly about UC San Diego just because they're such a great team to watch, and they're a special team for sure. Very different. We certainly want to see them on the national stage. And I think the road win at Utah State also checks that important box I just spoke of, where the committee wants you to be a team in the field, solidly in the field. UC San Diego is kind of along for the ride with Utah State, but Utah State seems to be safe still. They've slipped to probably a 10 seed, but from a just getting in standpoint, Utah State's probably 8 to 10 teams up above the cut line. So that should stand in the end. I think the other impressive part about that win, just to anchor their resume with, is the fact that only 2 teams won at the Spectrum all year, and they're one of them. So that's a big statement. I know, like we said earlier, right? They have a subcommittee on the bubble. All that stuff's going to get unearthed, and they'll be going under the hood. The other thing is they won at UC Irvine, and UC Irvine hadn't lost a home game in 2 years. So their story is like, what else do you want these guys to do? Come on. Yeah. That's my case, but I get it. It's a committee, and the deck is stacked against these guys. So I got to be honest about it. But I think, a run to the finals should be good. Like the semis, they'll probably get Riverside. They probably don't want to lose to Riverside in the semis because they already lost to Riverside. And I don't think it would be a good look to lose twice to the same team, especially the 4th place team. And if it's not Riverside, it's Northridge, which is better for the net. But they might be okay with a loss to Northridge. But yeah, it's all going to come down to who they lose to. Beautiful job by the Big West, by the way, Paul, because they did give both the top 2 seeds, which we assume will be UC San Diego and UC Irvine, a bye all the way to the semi. So they just got to show up to Henderson and win 2, and off to the dance.
Yeah, and like you said, those are the kinds of stories, those are the kinds of teams that at the end of the day, they have a couple of losses that you might scratch your head at, but it's like, what more can these guys do to put themselves in the tournament at the end of the day?
It's a lot of winning. It's like week in, week out, win, and then nobody still wants to like move them up or do anything with them. It's a hard world to live in from a bracketology standpoint.
Lukas, any more thoughts on UC San Diego?
No, I think they're in a little better spot than Drake in terms of potentially of winning Dayton should they get in. They're in the top 50 on average across quality metrics. That gives them a little bit of an edge there. I think all 3 of these teams, I'm sure we'll get to VCU next, they're in a pretty similar spot for selection. But I think in terms of where they would get seeded if they do get in, which I think all of them are kind of up in the air and dependent on how the bubble shakes out these last week and a half here, I think UC San Diego is kind of in the middle of those 3 in terms of where it could end up seeding wise.
Yep. All right, let's go. Last team here, VCU. Lukas, we'll start with you. VCU, a game tonight. I saw that they were almost a double-digit favorite, I believe, against Dayton. But this one's at the Siegel Center tonight. Dayton, big one in the A-10, last game of the regular season for both of them. VCU, are they safely in if they do not win the A-10?
I think I feel pretty good about it if they win tonight. I think I feel pretty good there. What they don't have is they don't have a solid win over the field. They don't have a win over a projected tournament team unless Colorado State were to work their win there. And they don't have one of those wins on the road, as they don't even have one at home. And they also have a quadrant 4 loss. There are some real negatives you can point out on VCU's resume, especially if you compare it to the UC San Diego and Drake. With that said, they do have more wins against the upper 2 quadrants. The A-10 has afforded a few more opportunities. They're 5-4 against the upper 2 quadrants. And most importantly, for if they were to be selected, they're 28.7 on average across quality metrics. That's in the territory of Michigan, like slightly ahead of Michigan right now, who many see as a 4 or 5 seed right now. It's the same conversation as Creighton, UConn, UCLA. They're a team that I think would get a seeding boost should they get into the field. They're a team that, of these 3, if all 3 were to get in the field, I think VCU would be the one that would be seeded the highest on the basis of that. I could see them as high as a 10 seed. But with that being said, the resume metrics are right on par with the bubble team right now. And if you compare it to the bubble, they don't have that win over a tournament team, and they do have a quadrant 4 loss. There are negatives. So their best case scenario is to certainly avoid that and make their way through the A-10. But there are some more forgivable kinds of losses in the A-10 relative to the Big West or the MVC.
Rocco, do you agree with that on VCU?
Mostly, yeah. I do have my concerns, though, because they didn't get that win over the field like the other 2 have. So I think that is, the biggest sticking point historically. And they also they have the poorest of the non-conference schedules. All of them are not great. Like UC San Diego's 232, Drake's 237, and VCU at 278. Some of that has to do with their own, ability to sell out the Siegel Center, 14,000 strong every night. Probably the best home team in the country. I think they've won every home game by 12 or more. It's been amazing. So we'll see if they can keep that going against the Flyers. But I think the collection of wins on the road, which is headlined by Dayton and St. Joe's. St. Joe's has worked their way pretty well up the net ladder and the A-10 standings. And then you back that up with George Washington and Loyola Chicago. Those all squeeze into the top 2 kind of nicely, and they're 5-4 overall record in the top 2 quads. And they have 2 quad 1 wins for today, but they're not tournament level wins. So I just have my hesitations due to that. I certainly want to see VCU there just as much as the others, but if there's one had to go, it'd probably be VCU for me.
All right. We've gone almost an hour here, so right before the buzzer, we're going to get to some games to watch for the weekend. And the first thing I want to do here, when you look at the games to watch, I want to look at maybe a couple of things from the top line of seeding. If there's anything that sticks out for you, we already talked about Florida, I think, as the one that you guys are really looking at. But anything else there around seeding wise? And then also, of course, for the bubble, I think there are 2 huge bubble games, at least for me. You're talking about those games with Indiana and Ohio State. Then obviously Nebraska plays as well. Oklahoma and Texas play. Just some big games there. Anything else stick out to you guys on games to watch? Lukas?
Well, it's a deep list. Tonight you got Colorado State, Boise State, Dayton, VCU. Those are big ones. Tomorrow, Duke, North Carolina. How about it? North Carolina has made sure that game that game will matter. They've taken care of business over the last few weeks. They've put their metrics still in a position where if they were able to beat Duke, they'll probably push their way to the field, as Rocco said earlier, that they really are just that one win away, it feels like, from checking that last box in the resume, but a box that they really need to check. But they've made that game meaningful. But to your point, there's a lot of games out here. Vanderbilt, Georgia is a nice one. UCF at West Virginia. West Virginia needs to kind of hold serve at home. San Diego State needs to hold serve at home against Nevada. Xavier needs to hold serve at home against Providence. There's a lot of these games where you could see teams, if they drop a game at home this weekend, they either fall off the bubble or they get themselves really quite close to the cut line when you don't want to be.
Rocco, your games to watch this weekend.
Well, yeah, and then another team would be Baylor. We didn't get to them in our outline, but I think with Baylor hosting Houston if they win, they're getting in for sure. That's a huge win. And their biggest problem is their record and the way they've played without Big Josh. So it's been tough on the Bears. They've been 3-4 since the injury, and losses to Colorado and Cincinnati, 2 teams not dancing. And so if Baylor loses that game and then goes out the first game of the Big 12, I think there's a real chance they're not dancing at all. So high stakes for them, especially playing one of the best teams in the country. I would also say we didn't talk much about the 2-seed battle. There's a bunch of teams trying to get that last 2 seed. I think the national respect or interest is on St. John, so they really need that win at Marquette to realistically get there. So that's a big one on Saturday. Kansas has been slipping, as we've been talking about on most shows. One last chance for a good win for Kansas and to kind of get back on track, hosting Arizona. And then I think the 2 big bubble bursters, Ohio State at Indiana, and, of course, the Oklahoma at Texas.
Gentlemen, the fact that we didn't mention Alabama-Auburn is hilarious, but that's what bracketology is at this point. But Alabama-Auburn, pretty darn. If you're going to watch a game and not really have it impact bracketology as much, that's probably the one to physically watch is Alabama-Auburn.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, anything else, fellas? Anything on your minds that you got to get off your chest before we wrap this show up? Anything from either of you that we didn't get to?
Watch the conference tournaments. Yeah, I say watch the conference tournaments. Screw all these big teams. Watch the conference tournaments this weekend. You'll be able to see everybody else next week. Give these little guys your attention.
First bid out tomorrow.
From Rocco Miller. You heard it from Rocco. Rocco's going to be in a bunker somewhere with no light, wherever in the world Rocco is. I hope you can see your bracket, Rocco. I hope you got enough light out there.
We're good. We're good.
All right. Rocco, Lukas, thanks so much for joining us here today on Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. See you back here on Monday as we get into conference championship week, and should be a fun weekend. Enjoy it, fellas.
Thank you.